It's a lovely combination of food, wine and life and culture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. This is not for you, Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Right, I'm here to give a little trivial talk about the subject of wine. Well, wine is an interesting subject because ever since man cultivated food, wine existed. If you never know anything about wine, wine is actually a really simple subject to take on. Just imagine if you never know math, and what's the value of pi. Most people would know it's 3.14, and I can tell you wine is red or white or rosé. If you go a step further, most people would know it's 3.1415927, and you can talk a lot more about wine, which is you know your Pauillac from your Burgundies, your Napa Valley, Riesling would taste with petrol when it's aged, and you can talk more wine blurb about the best Burgundies taste like horse shit. So anyway, the difficulty of learning and studying about wine is really infinite, so as the value of pi continues. The subject matter is also of interest because when wine developed initially, it was actually used as a religion, as a cultural tool. When men were at their primitival forms, wine is a drink to take away their fear. Wine is also a drink to make them feel godlike for a short period of time. The fear is gone, the pain is numbed, they're sitting more relaxed, but very immediately they feel the after pain of headache. So that reminds them they're human. Having some historical and cultural understanding of wine, but my talk will really focus on the business aspect of wine, particularly on the wine in China. About 6-7 years ago, drinkers of wine in China are very, very small proportion of the consumer base. Probably people sitting around here who are expatriate, where people travel abroad, bringing these particular products to China. But now, China is about to become the 5th largest wine market in the world. Last year, there are about 500 million bottles of wine imported, and a lot more bulk wines, which means wines are bought in containers. Really, how much wine has been sold in China, that is a myth. The great import market, actually not a lot of the importers themselves know what's the market size or what's the distribution, because everything was moving so fast. The significance is this. Last year, China imported 30% more wine than they did the year before, but they imported 80% more in value terms, which means they're buying better wines, more wines from more regions. Anybody who's here who are French? Excellent. France is the country who sold most wines to China. 55% of the Chinese wine import is actually from France. China is buying a lot of them, but my question is, how does the West and China treat wine differently, and why? I think firstly, the biggest difference I find coming back to China now, I work in Shanghai now for about 3 months, is I can afford a bottle of wine in the UK, but on the same product, I typically can't afford it. The price difference is between 2 to 4 times the price as you would pay in Europe. Now, there is an issue with taxation, with import duties, which contributes to about 48% of the wine prices. But the biggest contributor to the price difference is the profit to the importers, to the distributors, based on the asymmetry of information the consumer gets. So price is the first difference. Secondly, I think there's a significant difference between how wines are marketed and sold. In Europe, if you pick up this bottle, any Spanish person here? No? Great. So I can talk about this. Great wine from Rioja. The wines are grown at about 500 meters. The grapes are selected during the evening. It has a certain color. It should be served at certain degrees. It works very well with lamp. So all this introduction at the back of the label is a description of how the wine is picked and stored and made. It's terroir, which means how it's grown, supposedly to have some significance of how it would taste, and how the food should be paired with this particular product. And the Western thinking process is very logical, linear, fact, there's a reason and a benefit. When it comes to China, I think wine has a much more social attributes towards it. The very first thing people would ask is this French? Whether it has a nice packaging. I know a very good, the largest wine distributor in China, they insist for every single bottle of wine they sell, they have to have a very nice package, even if it's $1 or €1 wines. The package means the wine is of quality, of a certain standard. And thirdly, on China, it's really looking at what's the value of wine. It's not determined on the price, but who you would drink it with. I think the Western China has the similarity that wine serves a social purpose, but probably more so in China. The third significant area of differences in China is the taste, is really indifference. There's a lot of occasion you hear the story that a very expensive Chateau Lafite or Romani Conti being consumed initially with Coca-Cola or Sprite or with ice. Nowadays, people are getting much more acquainted with how to drink more expensive product. But really, rarely people understand, the true taste of wine, what really constitutes a good product. Some rumored Chinese palate are sweeter than the Western countries, like German Rieslings, for instance. In European countries are perceived as more inferior. In China, the taste pairing better with Chinese food. But really, taste is less of an issue. Brand is more of an issue. Whether it has a class growth tag to it, the Chateau Lafite wields the magic power. Anything with the 5 arrows would sell. 80% of the Chateau Lafites or products in China is actually an infringer or a fake product. And if the Baudelaire is putting together, their export together, China is currently the single largest market. So there are a number of differences, but what's the reason to drive the Chinese to buy this wonderful product from the West? I think the biggest reason is wine is an inspiration. As it was previously in the ancient Roman and Greek country. Why does the aristocracies would drink wine instead of ale? Because it's more concentrated, it's taken more time to produce, it's more expensive. And nowadays, Chinese people, particularly the more affluent Chinese youth and middle class people, would actually find wine a foreign product, regardless of its taste, regardless whether it's a better constitute or the traditional drink. I see that as a cultural migration, and China taking a product that is invented in the West, where China has no heritage of, but taking them on gladly as a symbol of wealth, maybe good taste, and a symbol of cultural migration. Talking of which, I think we also see a number of other similar products in China nowadays. I've been living in the UK for the last 12 years, and it's a really interesting 12-year period. When I first came to the UK, China was the 6th largest economy. When I left the UK in February this year, China is now number 2. For the last 5 years running, until 2011, the biggest single export from the United Kingdom to China was actually waste. Waste metal, computer-backed chipboard, to be used, recycled to make new products. Until 2011, in 2011, the biggest single export from the UK to China is luxury cars. At the same time, we see a phenomenal growth of Chinese investors coming to the UK to buy the best properties around in London, as well as in Australia, in Sydney, in the US. There's a significant phenomenon of Chinese families to send their kids abroad, to travel, to study. UK and the US are the joint first destination for Chinese young kids to travel internationally and study. And my conclusion, drawing from the experience from wine, is there's a significant understanding nowadays in China of the lifestyle of the West. And there's a significant admiration of that, all things good and better, which caused some confusion and difficulty for me, as a person who's struggling in between. I grew up in China till I was 17. I went to the UK, had my best years there, had a few drinks, met a girl, settled down, all the things you do when you're young. But really, having seen Chinese taking on so much of foreign culture, would that really affect the root of the nation our ancestors, our practices, and our culture. Having thought more deeply on this particular matter, I think that really doesn't matter. If you go back 300 years ago, the Xinhua nails, which is of Chinese fashion, anything to do with China, Chinese silk, Chinese porcelain, Chinese drawings, are exported around the world, being perceived as the best in class, used in courts of royalties in Europe, in the great palaces around. And what really does matter if 300 years later that turns around. So the China is on a discovery of the world's treasures and best. So I'm less worried right now as a Chinese. But thinking as a British person now, when I was in the UK for the last 12 years, if any of you pick up the mainstream newspaper, Times, if you do Financial Times, pick up Telegraphs, Guardians, I guarantee you 85% of the news is negative on China. China's done this, it's done that, it's funny, people are strange. I think this is truly a misrepresentation of the Chinese society nowadays. Of course, there are areas of development needs to be changed, areas of problems and challenges many of my previous speakers has addressed. But the key problem I sense with the cultural diversity and differences nowadays is the West hasn't picked up the speed as China have done for the last 10, 15 years or so on their internationalization. A lot of the international countries, Western countries, including the UK, are still very much on their little walls, hiding themselves. They don't know much about China other than Beijing or Shanghai. They don't know China actually has more than 300 cities with the same city size as Birmingham. They don't know actually Chinese kids learn English since they're 6 years old nowadays. Then they certainly don't know Chinese are just as well making wines as they do. Chinese wines, the white liquor has been made about 4,000 years ago. And if you look at tea as a commodity, it shares an increasing amount of similarity as good wine. Different varietals, the ability to age, the good vintages and the bad vintages, the craftsmanship that needs to be put into making them. So if I may propose a theory, I think China has gone a long way on the fast track of modernization, of internationalization. 10 years ago, there are no fast track links on the railway. I just came up a 5-hour train from Shanghai to Beijing, which changed the speed of exchanging of information. Much more Chinese are traveling abroad, learning the best things. The wine market picked up from zero within the 5 years to about 500 million bottles. The West, on the other side, needs to do a lot more to catch up. There's a significant change on the world nowadays. China is now importing a lot more. It needs to rebalance its economy. And that may bring opportunities for Western companies. In my line of work, I work with many British companies exporting their product or services to China. And what we see most recently is there's so many members joining in where we usually don't see that many. Last year was our best performing year. We see much more British companies, small, medium-sized firms selling their product. Some are indigenous, some are really creative to the Chinese market, not only on a single-minded way, but also looking for collaborative opportunities. What Ray mentioned this morning, I think was a really great example of how companies with capacity and with ideas can work together. I propose that there will be much more understanding mutually between the West and China. And I give you 2 small examples of that to end my talk. Firstly, this year we saw at the London Book Fair, which is a very significant event in the UK, with many Chinese book publication companies to attend. We hosted dinner for 2 of the statesmen coming in to the UK. And there's an increasing appetite in the West to learn Chinese culture and language. I was speaking to a speaker earlier on how many of their peers and children's peers actually speaks the language. 85% within my organization of our foreign staff are studying Chinese, or have studied Chinese, therefore working in my council. And if you go, more and more I travel, I talk to people, they actually understand Chinese culture. I was climbing Mont Blanc in 2009, and my mountaineering coach actually asked me whether I can play mahjong. Sadly I can't, but he's really good on that. The second small fact is we're seeing more exporting of Chinese culture and commodities. I was at Heathrow lately, a few weeks ago, and a Chinese brand of baijiu, which is a fiery liquor, for those of you who don't have it before, has been exported out to London Heathrow under the name of Shui Jingfang, which is a Chinese company, but under the investment of Diageo, which is a British firm. And they're selling their product in the UK. So once again, I propose the idea that there will be more cultural integration, maybe through the means of wine, but primarily through people. And that's the idea I want to share with you today. Thank you very much.